Transportation Accessibility Advisory Committee. My name is David Fenley. Do we have folks online or not? No folks online today. I'm not sure. We do? Okay. Okay.
Ken is going to try to call in from his phone. He's on a trip to Michigan in a car.
That's right. That's right. Cool. I'll give that.
Sam is supposed to call in. Sam is attending from home, I think.
Okay.
And
Thank
then
you.
Also, Rachel.
How about Ken?
Ken is in a car,
He's
yeah.
on vacation.
He's going to try to on his phone.
Thank.
Diane Graham-Rath.
So we have some folks online who hopefully should be joining us here shortly. In the meantime, let's go around the room and do introductions. I know that we all know each other, but we need to kill some time, so. Let's just do it. I'll start, David Fenley. TAAC chair left this time.
I'm Trevor Turner. I'm the Public Policy Director for the Minnesota Council on Disability.
I'm Richard Rowan. I represent AARP.
Heidi Meyer, Minnesota CCD.
Claudia Fugly, MNCCD.
Daryl Paulson, Vice Chair and representing Region F, I believe. I always question that because I've represented almost every region on the council, so.
Carrie Sheldon representing G, and nice to see everyone finally.
Chris Bates, Precinct B.
Patty Thorson. It's Trellis now. It used to be Metro Area Agency on Aging. So good to be here.
Thank you.
Phil Sterner, I'm the Metropolitan Council representative on the committee, and I represent District 15, which would be Rosemont, Apple Valley, Egan, and Evergrove Heights.
Thank you, Phil.
Allison, admin.
Andy Streasick, staff liaison and Metro Mobility.
We have a quorum.
We do. We have 9 folks. Perfect quorum. Thank you. Thank you, Allison, for reminding me that. We can go ahead and get started with business since we have quorum, and then hopefully the folks will be joining us online shortly.
Do we have that person who did it last month? He helped get them online.
There are probably some technical difficulties, but we have 9 folks. We have a quorum, so we can proceed.
Did they say that? Because that guy got them online last time.
I'm hoping.
I mean, the guy behind the curtain.
Yes. Behind the curtain.
The wizard.
No, he was literally behind the curtain back there and helping us.
Yeah. Well, we have quorums. We can proceed, and then they probably just haven't jumped on yet. There might be technical difficulties, or maybe they won't be joining us. But we got enough folks, so we can continue moving on with the agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda at that.
So moved.
Thank you, Chris. Second? All right.
Second.
But do I have to do roll calls anymore now that we're not online? Oh, fantastic. All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Perfect. Oh, this is much more slick. Fantastic. Thanks, Andy. So that is approved. It looks like we have some folks joining us online. I think 77 is Sam. Memory serves me correctly, and Diane's there too. Hello, Diane, and I think hello, Sam. Welcome. We just approved the agenda, and we're moving on to minutes now, of which I would entertain a motion to approve.
So move.
Thank you, Daryl.
Second.
Thank you, Chris. All right, all in favor, aye. Opposed, no.
Aye.
Opposed? Perfect. Thank you all very much for moving right through that. Let's just dive right in. Is Eric here? Is Eric joining us on the line? You are representing Eric.
I am Eric.
I'm
actually Asmus. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're gonna have a discussion of the transit onboard survey. We've been looking forward to this for a couple months now. So glad to have you in person.
Can you sit down? Right here at the front, yeah.
Just to pick up your mic.
We got one more person.
Yep.
And when you want to move your slide, just say next slide.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, let us know. I'm guessing you're Ashley then.
Yeah.
Okay, it's hard to hear sometimes with folks masks on, but thank you for being here, Ashley. Yeah, give us a little intro and then take it away.
Sure thing. Yeah. Is this mic on?
Yes.
Okay, great. My name is Ashley Asmus. I'm a data scientist at MTS. And I work a lot with travel survey data. So I've come to this group before to present to you the household travel survey that we do. The whole council does this to track travel behavior over time. This is sort of a subset of that household travel survey. It's the same program, the same funding structure, but instead we're looking at people's travel behavior on board transit. And it's called the Onboard survey because we're literally asking surveyors to ride the buses and trains and interview people about their trips while they're traveling. So I'm coming to you with the small text on this slide says pilot survey update. That's because the data I'm presenting to you today is from our pilot of our main transit onboard survey that's in the field right now. So we have people out collecting information on the whole regional transit system right now. But last fall, we did an extended test of that survey to see what travel behavior was like in the time of COVID. So let's look at the next slide. So first, I'll cover what the Onboard survey is. I guess I've already talked about that a little bit. And then I'll go through the pilot survey findings. So with three main parts. First, who's on board transit now? What are the demographics of riders like? Second, what kind of trips are people making? And third, how has travel behavior changed specifically among riders with disabilities? I have just a slide about how our main survey is going as a placeholder, and then some time for feedback or discussion from you all. I think I have my questions that I'm asking you on the next slide. Yes, great. So here are the places where I'm hoping to get feedback from you. First of all, how do these findings that I'll be presenting to you today match your own impressions and experience riding transit? If you've been riding transit lately in particular, I'd love to hear from you. And how do they differ? And then what sort of research areas do we need to dig deeper into? So I'm presenting a real smattering of findings to you today. I hope that's okay. But if there's a place where you're like, oh, this is interesting, it's jiving with my experience, I want to know more, or I want you to look at other data to tell a more complete story, I definitely want to hear that from you. There's a third bullet point here. What linkages should we make between this survey's findings and transit or transportation planning? So I'm kind of presenting a unopinionated group of facts to you today. But if there are places where you can see the obvious linkages between what I'm presenting and between that and transportation policy, I'd love to hear that. And finally, if you would like this research to find a broader audience or a different audience among stakeholders that you all interface with, that would be great to know too. Okay. Next slide. All right, so first of all, what is the Onboard survey? On this slide is a picture of me conducting the survey. I rode the buses for a few days this fall to get a sense of what the survey was like. It's really fun. I love this survey. So I walk up and down the aisle with a tablet, and as I intercept people, I'm counting a random number to choose who to interview. I sit down with them and I ask them, about themselves and about where they're coming from and going to. We conduct rich survey with this tablet. We get a lot of information. So it's called an intercept interview survey, right? Because we're randomly intercepting people on board trains and buses. And that's really important because this is really the only source of data we have about transit in our region that is randomly collected, right? So we're not depending on people to return paper surveys that they're handed on the bus or the train, which can give you kind of a biased picture of like who is most willing to talk to the person. In this survey, in fact, we hand out $1 free ride coupons to people who complete the survey with us, and that's really boosted and made really equitable the response across race, ethnicity, and age. We do this survey every 5 years, and the last survey was in 2016, which is actually 6 years ago. I don't know if you remember something that happened as we were getting ready to roll this out in 2021. Basically, the FTA asked us to just wait 1 more year before we went out in the field with that, and we did just that. So this fall 2021 pilot, it was just a test of our survey instrument, but also to collect as much data as possible. And so we sampled the busiest Metro Transit routes. I've got a list of those at the back of this presentation if you're interested. All right, next slide. So we do this survey to better understand current transit riders and markets. It also improves transit forecasting and planning, and it supports before and after studies. This type of data, this like random sampling of people who ride transit, it's federally required. We need robust data like these to evaluate transit service and how it's affecting our region. All right, next slide. Okay, before I get into the findings, I just want to talk about how we're sort of conceptualizing these data. On this slide here, I have 2 big circles. The first big circle is larger, and it represents the trips and riders in 2016. So the universe of trips and riders in 2016. And there's a smaller circle on top of that that almost overlaps, but not quite, and that corresponds to the trips and riders of 2021. So we think that the people we're encountering on board transit right now and the trips that they're making, it's mostly, but not entirely, of course, but mostly a subset of those trips. So using that framework, oh yeah, let's go to the next slide, thanks. So using that framework, we can calculate or conceptualize, right, of trips that we've retained and kept on the system and those that have been lost in the COVID era. In 2016, on these routes that we sampled, our top 12 busiest routes, there were 157,000 trips per day in 2016. So we've got these darker colored people icons, or all these people icons represent all those trips that were taken on the whole system. But only 72,000, or 46%, were retained overall, while 54%, or 85,000 trips, were lost. So that's how we're conceiving of this data. And that 46% retention rate, you could use that as like a base number for the rest of the comparisons I'll make through this presentation. So roughly, we retained about half of trips on the transit system for these routes. All right, let's go ahead. Oh, yay. Okay, so first we're going to start with demographic comparisons. Who is on board right now? Next slide. Great. We'll start with a simple one, gender, but it actually says a lot, I think. So the top line here says we retained a greater share of men's trips than women's trips. There's a little bit more to the story here. First of all, going into this survey in 2016, it was already a male bias on board transit. So there were 90,000 trips made by men and boys in 2016 compared to 72,000 trips per day made by women and girls. So already more trips by men and boys on the transit system. But that skew has gotten even larger in the COVID era because we retained only 41% of trips made by women and girls compared to 47% of trips made by men and boys. All right, and let's go to the next slide, which shows you how this plays out in terms of the composition of people on board transit. So this is the percent of weekday trips made by men and women. So in 2016, it was a 45-55 female to male split of trips. In 2021, it's a 40% to 57% female to male split on board transit, plus this year, thank goodness, we're also asking about non-binary and transgender identities. So some people are also responding as not identifying as either of these binary gender terms. It's a small share, so I haven't broken it out on this slide, but there's an appendix that shows you how that's playing out across age groups, which is really fascinating. There's a lot of younger people, especially, who are identifying as non-binary or a different gender that's not listed on the survey. All right, let's go ahead. Okay, so that was about gender. We're retaining more trips by men. We also retained a greater share of trips made by riders of color. And this is showing you for all these, this chart is pretty complex. It's showing you for all of the racial and ethnic groups that we had people select on the survey. They could select multiple options, of course, so sometimes people might be double counted on this chart if they identify as more than one race or ethnicity. But I just want to talk about two numbers here, and that's the column for riders who identify as white, and then the column for riders who identify as Black or African American. Those are the two most commonly selected racial identities on the survey. So before, the majority of trips were made by white passengers, 79,000 trips per day in 2016. About 40% of those were retained in 2021. Compared to Black and African American riders, we started with 46,000 trips per day, so about half of the trips made by white riders, and 50% of those trips were retained. So 40% retention rate among white riders, 50% retention rate among Black and African American riders. And of course, we know, race can be a stand-in for a lot of other socioeconomic factors because of the way racism works in our society. So when we think about income, access to cars, where people live, all of that is playing out in this retention rate by race. Okay. Let's go to the next one. There are other numbers there that are interesting. And this is how it plays out in terms of the proportion of riders identifying as one or more of these race or ethnicities. I've removed white people who only identify as white from this chart so that you can better see the top line number here. In 2016, half of riders identified as Black, Hispanic, Asian, multiracial, or Native American, or another identity. In 2021, that share of people who identify as BIPOC for shorthand has increased to 55%. So a greater share of riders on board transit are male, also a greater share of people riding are BIPOC. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, this is a good take-home one, I think. So I said there's a lot of socioeconomic factors at play here. One of those is household income. We know that people with lower incomes tend to be more reliant on transit, tend to have less access to personal vehicles. And that has played out really predictably in the COVID era. We retained way more trips by people who are making less money compared to those who are bringing home more money. So people who said they made less than $15,000 a year in their household, we retained over half of those trips compared to 36%, 43% of trips making just a little bit more, of people making just a little bit more than that. And once you get to these really high income categories, $100,000 to $150,000 per year, we retained only 19% of those trips. So first of all, there were more lower income people taking those trips in 2016. And second, we've retained more of those trips. I think sometimes people might use this as a shorthand for transit reliance. We also ask about access to cars on the survey as well. It shows what you might expect. All right, let's go to the next slide. Yay, okay, now we're getting into the disability stuff. All right, so this first one is showing you retention rate for those who consider themselves to have a disability, yes or no. We, of course, also have a prefer not to answer option here, and plenty of people choose that option, but we're not showing it here just for simplicity. So for people who identified as having a disability, they made about 19,000 trips per day in 2016, and we retained 71% of those trips. Remember, our baseline number was 46% of all trips retained on the system. 71% of trips made by people with disabilities were retained in 2021. That's huge, compared to 42% for those who said they did not have a disability. And additionally, the share of trips made by those with a disability has increased on board transit from 11% to 18%. So 1 in 10 to almost 1 in 5 people on board transit right now says that they have a disability of some kind. That is huge. I think that says a lot about the way we need to plan transit and make it accessible to our current group of riders. All right, next slide. We also retained, so I said we retained more trips by men than women overall. That's true for people with disabilities too. So people with disabilities, we had 59% of trips made by women with disabilities retained, compared to, for men with disabilities, 73% of those trips retained. So the gender dynamics that were playing out in the population as a whole are also playing out in the disabled population, the population with disabilities. Let's go to the next one. And then for looking at this across age, this chart is really complex, so I will send it home or offer to talk through it in more detail after the presentation if you'd like some more information here. First, I just want to say that we see in our data, as we do in the world writ large, that older folks tend to report having a disability at higher rates than younger folks. And so we see the number of trips taken by people with disabilities increase with increasing age, because those people who are 55 to 64, for example, are more likely to report having a disability than younger people. But then we see that across all the age groups for people with disabilities, whether they're under 18 or over 65, we see consistently higher retention rates compared to those without disabilities in the same age group. So 36%, for example, of riders between 18 to 24, or 36% of trips made by people without disabilities who were real young, 18 to 24, college age, were retained. So just a third of those trips retained for people without disabilities, those young college age-ish students. 72% of those trips by college age people with disabilities were retained. So double the retention rate in that age category, and it's just true across the board. There's also a tiny interesting tidbit here where we're seeing more people in the under 18 category respond saying that they have a disability of some kind, and I'm not sure if that's just a change in the way people identify themselves or share their own information, or it could be a rise in disability rates among younger people as well. All right, let's go to the next one. Okay, what kinds of trips are people making? So first I talked about demographics, I talked about gender, disability status and income, and race. Now I want to talk about where people are going on board transit. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide. There we go, okay. All right, so the first two slides are sort of a cartoon that I'll just talk about. It's as if you were riding a train and you were going to sample 157 people and ask all of those 157 people in 2016 where they were going. Okay, roughly like a half would say they were going, or maybe, a fifth would say they were going on a social trip, and then maybe a third would say they were commuting to work. Maybe they were commuting to work at that peak 9 to 5 hour. They had those like 9 to 5 style commutes. Or they had off-peak commutes where they were going to work in the middle or the end of the day. We've got people going to school. We've got people going on errands. We've got people going out to eat and going to medical trips. We also separate those out. And just a handful of people you would encounter on board these lines would say they were going to the airport. So of those 157 people, you would only encounter 4 that would say they were going to the airport. Okay, where have all these trips gone in 2021? We can look at the next slide. All right, we're missing a lot of the people on board transit, but we're still encountering all these different trip types on board our buses and trains. Plenty of people still going on social trips, still about a third going to or from work. And everybody who said they were making an errand trip in 2016 is still there. They're still making their errand trips in 2021. This is just the coolest thing that we were not expecting to see. Obviously, dining trips are way down. Airport trips are way down. Only one person instead of 4 would say they're going to the airport now. And our medical trips, almost everyone who said they were going to a medical trip in 2016 on board transit is still there in 2021. All right, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so this is showing you that in numbers. We grew the number of errand trips on board these lines in 2021. So we retained over 100% of errand trips. So people doing these like basic life maintenance activities, like that has grown on board transit over time. In the meantime, we're retaining about 39% of peak 9 to 5 commuters, 37% of off-peak commuters, half of all school commutes. Bear in mind, this is even when we were using the transit system to shepherd high school students around when the school buses weren't working so well in St. Paul. We see 70% of medical trips retained compared to just 22% of airport trips. All right, let's go to the next slide. So then if we look at that as a share of people on board transit again, so adding everything up to 100%, you'll encounter on board transit now many more people relative to all the other trips, many more people going on errand or shopping trips. 24% of people on board transit say that they're going to the grocery store, they're going to the pharmacy, they're going to pick up something from, from their lawyer or something, compared to 11% in 2016. So that number has more than doubled. Meanwhile, every other category has shrunk a little bit, except for medical trips and school commutes. So the share overall has grown a little bit for those two categories, even as the number has decreased. Okay, next slide. All right, and here it is for people with and without disabilities. And I'm showing you for 2016 and 2021, but I'm just gonna talk about that 2021 bar on the right. So in 2021, people who said that they had a disability, 38% of those trips were for errands, compared to only 20% of trips made by people without a disability said that they were going for errands. So we're seeing a huge share of people with disabilities traveling for errands, and a much larger share of trips made by people with disabilities to medical facilities, to some sort of doctor appointment, to the hospital, to their physical therapy. So 15% of trips made by people with disabilities are for medical trips, compared to less than 5% for those without disabilities. And of course, every other trip type is represented as well. It's one of the take-home messages I'd like for you to get from this presentation, is that transit continues to serve a wide variety of trip types. Social trips, going to work, all of these are valid and wonderful reasons for people to take transit regardless of who they are or why they're on board. All right, let's go to the next slide. Next slide. Great, okay. This is just for fun, I think. But so we had this mystery that was occurring to us as we were going into the survey that we wanted to resolve. We had been seeing, before COVID, there were these two distinct peaks across the course of the day of when people would travel. We'd see that 9 a.m. peak and then that 4 a.m. peak as workers and school kids were going to and from work and school, right? But we never saw that come back. during the COVID-19 era. We still see a really smooth trend in the number of trips people make across the course of a day. Even now, even this week, you won't see a 9 a.m. and a 5 p.m. peak. So those peak commute times are essentially gone. And what people have taken away from that trend is, to get transit ridership back, we just need to bring back those 9 to 5 commuters. Okay, I want you all to know that that is just not true. So I think I even wrote it on this slide, if you hit the next slide. Yeah, okay, yeah. A rebound in 9 to 5 commutes alone will not restore ridership to peak pandemic levels. It was true in 2016, and it's true now. All sorts of trips were actually forming the backbone of that two-hump pattern. So it wasn't just 9 to 5 commutes going to their office jobs. It was people traveling to get to their shift work jobs. It was people traveling to visit their friends. It was people traveling to go out to eat, all of which we're doing a lot less of now than we were before. And people are probably opting not to take transit at a greater rate than before because of concerns about the pandemic or other issues. All right, let's go to the next one. And this is true for people with disabilities as well. So I just wanted to break out this time of day graph for people with and without disabilities so that I could talk about how, for people with disabilities, we see a smooth trend across the course of the day in the number of trips people are making. So people with disabilities, onboard transit, still relying on all-day service. Okay, next slide. Oh, yeah, just some little fun tidbits. I think I've got 2 slides here to talk about other travel behavior insights. At previous presentations I've given about this data, people have asked me, well, how are people getting to transit in the first place? And how are they planning their trip? Oh, dang it. Okay, I've got the wrong title on this graph. It should say, how did you plan your trip at the top here? So basically, about over half of all riders, regardless of age, are saying that they're just taking a regular known trip, which to me says that people are really reliant on predictable and frequent service, that they aren't consulting Google Maps every time they get on a bus. They know where their bus stop is and they are gonna go out and get on it. And of course, for younger folks, more of them are using a smartphone to plan their trip compared to older folks with that tech savvy. Okay, let's go on to the next one. Then we've got how did you get to the first transit stop, both for 2016 and for 2021. For people with and without disabilities, the vast majority are walking, jogging, or rolling to get to the transit stop. In 2021, 95% of those with a disability were walking, jogging, or rolling to get to the transit stop, which says a lot about how we need to make our transit stops and our pedestrian infrastructure accessible to make transit in general work. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so key trips or key findings for overall trips and riders retained. We're retaining more BIPOC riders, more men, lower income riders. Also, I didn't show it, but those who are unemployed, definitely still relying on transit service. And riders who identify as having a disability. Remember, over 70% of trips by people with disabilities were retained. It's just huge. And what are the core trip types that transit continues to serve? I want you to remember all trips, not just commutes. It was never just commutes. It's all kinds of trips. It's how people are making their life happen. Okay, and then let's go to the next slide. Right. So I presented some disability-specific information here. I don't know if it was particularly effectively organized, but I hope it told some kind of a story. I'd love to know if anything jumped out at you or matched your lived experience, if there's anything where we need to dig deeper, and if you see any linkages between what I've presented here and policy. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ashley. I find this wildly interesting, and I can tell that you do as well. I'm pretty sure there'll be a lot of discussion. I have some questions too, but let's go to Chris and then Heidi.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ashley, here's one of the things. I mean, your survey stops at Q1, right? 2021?
That's right, yeah. Well, we're conducting the survey, the main survey now. Yeah.
Okay, because I think some of the numbers will be skewed because of the price of gas. I mean, I have family and friends that couldn't live without their cars that are taking the bus to work. And in my building, which is a senior disability, we're seeing more transit link and more Metro Mobility usage than we have before. So I'm just wondering, that will skew the numbers a little bit, correct?
Oh, yeah, I would think so. I think even now, or at least the last time I checked, overall trip rates, like boardings per day, hasn't changed as much as we would have expected it to with rising gas prices. But we're definitely monitoring it over time. And you know what we're going to see is that for people with lower incomes, they're especially going to be more likely to switch to transit compared to those with a higher income, because a greater percent of your income goes towards paying for gas or a car payment or whatever the expensive price costs of private vehicle travel. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we're going to keep an eye on that for sure. Yeah.
Heidi?
My question is, and I have a concern, I'm always going to be in the low income category because of the disability, so
Right.
it kind of messes up your data, okay? And if I don't have Metro Mobility or a worker, transit, because the type of disability I have is always transit. So I have to use it as much as I can for certain things. So thank God I have Metro Mobility because buses don't go everywhere.
Right.
So that these, your questions kind of go out the window a little. And the pandemic has cut back on, having buses out there, drivers. And so
Yeah.
there used to be more, or that location is no longer existing. And it just irks me, as you're going through this, it kind of made me like, I'm in that low category, and you keep saying no income, but I can't make that kind of money. So how do you ask the question in a different way? So then I get heard that I use the bus, not because it's low income, I just use the bus because my disability doesn't allow me to drive, period.
Right. Yeah.
And so I have to rely on everybody else to take care of me on that respect
Yeah.
or I walk.
Yeah.
So how do you come to me and say, and get the real true data that you need?
Right.
Because I don't want to be because I get put in that category a lot, but a lot of it has to do with my disability. And that's a real concern I have, that your data might be having false information.
Yeah, I think that's actually a good point. I think in general, we just have that one. Well, first, let me echo back to what I'm hearing from you, is that we're not capturing like the accurate picture of what your situation is. Like, it's not just that you have a disability and you're riding transit. You're riding transit because you have a disability that prevents you from having a driving option in your life, right?
Yeah, I don't
Yeah.
have the processing to do it.
Right, yeah.
And the same thing with making tons of money and certain things. So
Right.
your data kind of goes out the window, but at the same time,
Yeah.
I live in the suburbs, and I was thinking about that too. It's different than
Yeah.
being out in the middle of the city.
Right.
So your data may be different in how I use it.
Yeah. Oh, you're making me think that we should look more into another question that we ask on this survey. A question that we ask that I didn't present data about is, do you drive? So we ask, do you drive? And then we say, if they say, yes, I drive sometimes, then we say, could you have driven for this particular trip? To get at more of like, was driving an option for this person at all? We don't ask, and I think maybe we don't want to ask for a government survey where we're trying to build trust, Maybe we don't ask like, well, why can't you drive? like we probably don't want to know, or like harass people to know if like they have a DUI or something like that, and that's preventing them from driving. We just want to know if like driving is an option for them.
No, I really did
Yeah.
like your presentation, which is hard to, it's like I wanted to ask that question, and I
Yeah.
have to remember to finish your talk first. 'Cause
Yeah.
I felt kind of left out of the data, and
Yeah.
if you were going to survey me, it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that feedback. I think I'll come back to you with an extra bit of information about that question in particular, and hopefully that will fill in some gaps for you.
Okay,
Is that good? Okay, great. Yeah.
Let's do Richard, then Carrie.
Okay, thanks. It was a very interesting presentation. I do have one sort of question, comment. Well, I have two questions.
Sure.
This committee not only represents people with disabilities, but also the senior population that may not consider themselves as having a disability.
Right.
But I didn't see really breakout figures regarding the senior population, although I'm
Right.
sure you gathered data on that.
Right.
So I'm just pointing that out, that would be of interest to me.
Yeah.
The other thing is the change in when the peaks occur, would that tie into changing the idea of charging more during peak hours instead of, maybe even out the fare throughout the day instead of charging these higher amounts?
Yeah, actually, so for your second question, I don't know if this data is informing that discussion. I know that equity considerations are really driving some of the fare discussion, fare structure discussions that are happening, at least at Metro Transit. And I'm not sure about the distribution of trips over the course of the day, but I could ask Eric Lind and get more information about how this information is feeding into the fare simplification discussion, right? And then your first question, was about age.
Sure.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think I kind of glossed over one of the slides really quickly. That was the one with 20 bars.
Yeah, I saw you mention older men and that sort of thing.
Yes. Yeah. We do see higher retention of trips in general for people who are older. Oh, and I see a hand on the screen as well.
That's what I was trying to say.
Okay.
There's a hand.
Let's do Carrie, and then we'll go to the online folks. Okay. We'll get you first, actually. Go ahead. Yes, Carrie, go ahead.
I noticed that you only had a time frame from the morning to the evening. What about homeless people? Because there's an increase in that, or there has been, but have you questioned them if they have a disability or? Because I think that would fulfill your survey much, would make it more clearer.
Yeah. Too. Oh, I feel like I planted you. Okay, so I didn't present it here because we made a change halfway through our pilot survey because it was the pandemic. It still is the pandemic era, and things are so tough right now economically in our region, especially for those who are already on kind of the edge. And we see more homeless people riding than we did before, and it's changed the way that we're doing the survey. So now it used to be we would approach someone and you'd have to have a place you were coming from and a place you were going to on transit to make sense in this survey. And what we found as we were going around and as I was testing it out on the Blue Line especially, people are using the Blue Line as shelter and just a place to be. So we've added a new question or a new sort of structure to the survey to capture those trips, are you going to or from a place or just no particular destination, just riding? So we don't need to get into why they're just riding, that can be their own private reason, they could just be hanging out. But at least for those types of trips, we have a just riding around sort of variable to look at. And I don't think we've split that out by disability type yet. We probably didn't capture enough trips like that to look at it, but we'll look at that for the 2022 survey.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I ask another one?
Go ahead, Carrie.
Okay, have you gone through all of the lines or just the Blue Line, or are you gonna expand the survey? 'Cause I'd be interested.
Yeah, you could look at this, you could split out this data line by line if you wanted to, or route by route, right? And in fact, our online tool from 2016 allows people to do just that. So we'll update our 2016 survey tool to allow people to do that with 2022 data. The routes we surveyed, or the data I presented to you today, that's just from a subset of routes. The 10 busiest bus routes includes BRT, the A line and C line, and a green and blue line. It's like over half, I think 2/3 of all the ridership in 2021. So busy routes. But right now, we're sampling all routes, all providers, and this is great, all days of the week, so the weekend too. For whatever reason, traditionally, these surveys are only done Monday through Friday, I think because of a traditional 9 to 5 sort of commuter bias. And we'd like to get around that so that we're accurately capturing how people use transit.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you.
Take it away to your left, Carrie.
Me? I can't see. I'm gonna take this off. My magnification reader is defunct right now, so I'm in the process of getting a new one, so I didn't get to look at this ahead of time. But you kind of caught my attention with that comment you made about more people, I believe you said under 18,
Yeah,
are identifying having disabilities.
yeah.
So that could have some impact in the future, which I'm always concerned about in terms of funding other issues associated with that.
Yeah.
Did they specify what their disabilities are? Were they physical disabilities, mental disabilities? Did you get any data on that?
We did
Because that's an
not,
interesting statistic if that's the case. So.
Yeah, I think we did not ask that question, and I think it's even maybe because we came to this group a couple years prior and we workshopped with you, you know, how could we get at this information in a way that still respects people's privacy? And we ended up saying, okay, we just need to ask a yes/no question here, and that has to be good enough. Yeah, so we don't have a follow-up question about disability type, but we can look at national data, like from Pew Research or the census, to get a little bit more information about that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's go online to Patsy. And a reminder to folks in the room, if you can speak a little bit closer to the microphone. I just got a message from someone online saying that they have a little trouble hearing us. So.
I can't get any.
Go ahead, Patsy.
You can sit up on the table. Just this.
Oh, Patsy,
You're muted.
how can we hear Patsy? It actually looks like I can see the blue line around Patsy's screen.
Oh, maybe you're not muted, maybe.
Speakers need to be turned on.
We can't hear you.
Sounds like our
Is it our end?
wizard behind the curtain is working on it.
Okay.
While that gets figured out.
In the meantime, can I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Actually, I wanna thank you for your presentation. It was quite enlightening. I am a regular transit rider, so I'm not alarmed by a lot of the data, because it clearly shows if you're out there riding the system, even during today's age, during the pandemic. The one thing I'm happy about this is that it is highlighting the different ethnic groups, the different economic impacted groups. And I'm also happy that folks are self-identifying their own identifiers and their own markers that either allow them to use transit for social reasons or for reasons that they need to. I mean, so I think what that tells us as transit advocates and leaders at the table is it tells us that those factors, we need to partner with groups in the community that also have those same interests and those same likeness, so that, because we can't put a bunch of money into transit into these particular areas and assume that everybody else that doesn't agree with public transit is gonna buy into it, right? Because they're not going to, right? There's always gonna be a subset of population that say, no, I have my own private transportation, I don't care about public transportation.
Right.
And if I do care about public transportation, I only want to pay for it during this time or during that time. I don't want to pay for it 24/7 or 7 days a week, right? So, I mean, it clearly shows that there's a need for it. You identify the hot spots of the system, just like police do, or just like paramedics do, right? And then what we should do is concentrate in that area to provide either better public transit overall, or we can feed into the system by providing little feeders or little commuter type buses that feed into a greater system, so we don't have that impact on the system throughout the whole day, right? We just have it in small pockets, you know, but I don't know if you got any questions out of that, but I know I thought I heard a couple at least, but yeah, you can answer, and if you don't want to, that's fine too. Thanks.
No,
Feel free
thank
to
you for your
respond.
comments. I appreciate it. Maybe I'll let other hands
Are
go.
we, do we have audio on the people, with the people joining us online yet? Yes, no?
Can one of them talk to see if we?
Patsy, give us a hello, please. Nope.
Do you want to try Diane and see if the issue is Patsy or if it's everybody? Yeah, can the other one of the others?
No, Diane, looks like you're talking as well and we can't hear you.
No, nobody.
All right, we still can't hear you, but we'll work on it. We have more questions in the room. Heidi?
Yeah, I'm kind of glad that you are looking at different sexualities, you know, and how people identify themselves as, because I'm noticing now with everything going online and surveys and everything, now it's more the pandemic or they just working from home, whatever the case may be. It's getting hard to, you know, in the surveys or the questions you're asking, to put the real truth, because I don't know how your survey is going to be written up or translate into the software, you know what I mean? So it's something to think about in the future, that you don't pigeonhole, because they're doing that in housing and human services, they're pigeonhole certain things, and it's hard to, you know, see the real person for who they are.
Yeah.
So if you can keep it as lively as, and don't make me like in the poor part, you know, because I'm in a different category of how you ask your question, you know? I didn't ask to be poor, it just kind of is, but at the same time, I ride the bus, and I want to give you the answers you ask, because you have good things to say and good questions. It's just how it comes at me and some of the others in the community.
Yeah.
So something to think about in the future. Cool, thanks.
Thank you, Heidi. Any more questions in the room? Otherwise, I might ask a couple. I know I think maybe a little bit over, but this is a pretty fun topic.
Yeah.
Patty, go
I'm gonna
ahead.
take this a different angle.
Please do.
I live in a senior living community where it's some people with disabilities, most of the people are in their, I would say in their 80s or 90s. Some people are, as I'm listening to the information about the ages, I'm wondering, is there going to be research looking at what potential riders there are that are, say, in the aging, you know, in the senior community, that need transit but don't know about it?
Right.
What don't know about the options? Because I've had people that ask me about Metropolitan and about, there's another, I can't remember the name of the other organization. No, Mobility for All, I think, is what it is. I mean, it's not at the scale that Metropolitan.
I think it's testing stuff. You can continue, just testing the.
You know, I don't know if that's too, maybe that's asking the wrong question, or.
No.
Because it's fascinating. I mean, it's very fascinating.
Okay.
Well, I could say something real brief.
Yeah, please
there.
do.
Yeah, just that I think you're getting at exactly what the most frustrating thing about this survey is that we're only able to survey people who are on transit. Like that's our mission for this survey, right? But what we miss is all the people who aren't there and why they're not there. So there are a couple of angles to get there. One of them is with our household survey. We can look at general travel for all people, all modes. It's an address-based survey. And another is this new focus group study that MTS has just put together called the Transportation Needs Assessment. And this will be smaller conversations with small groups of people and individuals to understand more nuanced things that get beyond these tick the box sort of questions. And it's more a conversation about why are you choosing this travel mode? Why not something else?
Could you connect maybe with, the people that are operating the, I can't even think what senior living communities.
Oh, yeah.
Outreach people in executive directors might be too, well, we all are probably overwhelmed, but I know that at one point the outreach and salesperson where I live was, she knew that I was involved in Metro mobility volunteer stuff. And I suggested to her the idea of promoting in brochure packets that they put out about the community, trying to sell it, that they involve promotion of. So I don't know if that would be a networking place that you might try.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. I think I'll pass that along to a couple people doing different studies and see what they're doing, because I know there is some work being done at the level of housing, like housing developments and housing communities.
Right. I mean, I'm thinking of Ebenezer Society or Foundation. I'm thinking of Central Presbyterian Homes, things like that, getting at a large enough scale that you're catching the people that need the service. Excellent, fascinating research.
Yeah, it really is. Let's try online one more time. Patsy, can you give us a hello and hopefully we can hear you?
Hello?
Yay. All right. Fire away, Patsy.
I put it in.
Oh, no, she's.
I put it in the chat. The one main question or comment was, and that was with looking at the numbers of the peaks, with many people working remotely from home, I will make an educated guess that's really changed those peaks for the 9 to 5 because people are not working outside of the home. Am I correct with that?
Yeah, thanks. I see your question in the chat as well. Yes, that's true. Teleworking is definitely having an effect on these numbers. And we did ask about teleworking in this survey. I don't know if we have worked up those numbers yet, but we think about 1 in 5 people in general in the region are working from home right now due to the pandemic. It's just like a long-lasting sort of trend that we're going to see going forward. So yes, definitely the increase in teleworking among the professional class, people working these 9 to 5 office jobs, is going to have an effect on the time of day. But even more, I think, is the loss of all the other trips, or at least to the same extent, like the social trips, errand trips, and things that happen in the middle of the day too.
And not even park and ride anymore, hardly.
Yeah, and park and ride is essentially empty as well, yeah.
Thank you for that question.
Jasmine, can you hear me now, David?
Yes, we can hear you, Sam. Do you have a question?
Okay, I'm good now. No, I just wasn't able to be heard before, and actually, it was just addressed. So thank you.
Okay.
Well, thanks, Sam. Diane, take it away. No pressure, Diane.
There we go. There we go. I had a couple of questions / comments. You started off, wanting to know if our experience mirrored that. And my background is I work for Trellis, which is the area agency on aging, and we have seen a dramatic increase in ride requests from older adults for basic, exactly those kinds of trips that you're talking about that stayed steady of, just those chores.
Yeah.
And what we're hearing from our providers is that older adults do not feel safe using public transportation, that in part because the numbers of riders have gone down, they find themselves more isolated on vehicles and feeling more at risk when they do ride public transportation. So that may be a long-term issue that needs to be addressed in order to get the confidence of older adults to ride public transit. The other question has to do with kind of a long-standing theme that I've heard from older adults, and that is that the current long-standing hub and spoke approach to transit, where pretty much the majority of the lines go in and out of the two downtowns, and then you pick up something else to go somewhere else, that this seems even more antiquated now that nobody wants to go downtown. We've not just over the past 2 years, but many of the businesses are now switching to more of a hybrid. And so you have less and less call for folks to go downtown in the first place. And then again, because you don't have the presence of large numbers of people working downtown during the day, then you have people who feel more vulnerable waiting at bus stops that are not, populated by people just in the normal comings and goings of the business day. So, I think as Metro Transit looks at some of these issues, that it might be time to really start looking at more of a grid system or something that allows people to reach the resources within their community without having to go downtown or connect with some line that really has no bearing on where it is that they're trying to get to.
Sam, Jasmine.
Thank you, Diane, especially for going back to the questions that were asked of us by Ashley. Sam, go ahead. And then Patsy.
To piggyback on Diane's comments, in the blindness community, I have actually heard that exact same thing in regards to riding certain bus lines because people don't feel as safe anymore, and they can't see what's going on, and they feel like things are a little bit more shaky, and in downtown as well. And I will say I myself don't go downtown as much in the evening as I used to, and I could imagine that people maybe with high anxiety might feel that way as well if they don't feel secure. That's it.
Thank you, Sam. Did you want to respond? I mean, I think we are seeing an across the board safety concerns, both, and across the country as well. But yeah, it's just kind of a general unfortunate phenomenon right now. Patty. Thank you.
Sometimes I don't remember my own name. Something else is occurring to me, a different, is the ridership also taking into account the fact that of how we identify stops as being accessible or not. I live in, where do I live? I live in Minnetonka.
Minnetonka.
Yes, thank you.
I'm glad you figured that out.
Yeah. And if I was to take, I use a wheelchair to go long distances, I could get an accessible, the individual bus stop, I could go to downtown Minneapolis. But if I wanted to come back home again, the bus stop right near my home is not accessible. And so I'm wondering, and so this might not be exactly your area, but how are we thinking about, when we talk about an accessible bus stop, is it accessible just in itself? Or how do you calculate the ride so that can I only leave home and not come back again? How do I get back home? So I don't know where to address that, but that's something that struck me in the last 2.5 years.
It's something that we can keep on bringing up. I
Yeah.
know, especially in the suburbs, there are a lot of bus stops that are just a pole stuck into the grass,
Yeah,
essentially.
yeah, exactly.
No
Or in the
curb
middle
cuts.
of in the middle of a boulevard.
I am in one of them.
Yes, yes. Andy, did you want to chime in? Okay. Heidi, and then we will move on.
Okay, my question is, to go back to some of your other guys' question is that I was at the Gay Pride Festival. Okay, I know there's a TAAC committee because I got on it because I like transportation. I know I'm in the disability community. I know we talk about transportation. When I was at the Gay Pride Festival booth for transportation, all they were handing out were the sticker that had the rainbow and the buses. So I don't really have a sense of what transit does because they didn't tell me about trains. They didn't tell me about the buses. They didn't tell me that you're doing this interesting survey, that you brought to us. The community has no clue in all the different things that you come to the table and talk about. And I do know they made the news, and it was filmed at the Gay Pride Festival because they need bus drivers. But I knew nothing about how transit works. I knew nothing about anything. And they had 2 big booths and 2 giant tents. So it kind of makes me frustrated and angry that, we do all this good work, but then no one shares it in a way that the population can understand that we are doing good work and it's not all crappy and scary on the buses, and the trains and all that. Because transit isn't. And Gay Pride gets people from all over the state of Minnesota and sometimes outside of Minnesota that would love to learn about transit and be able to use our rich Minnesota history of what we have. But that was not apparent. I can make a bus out of a cardboard box. I can get a sticker. And the rest was just kind of like they were just standing there. And once in a while they'll talk to me, but they really didn't want to. So I just want you to bring that back because you're kind of lost in that picture, doing all your work, because I never learned any of it at the Pride, just so you know. So just something to think about. So all your questions you guys are asking about, well, how do we get this information out? Well, it's got to start with the bigger picture, and the bigger picture isn't doing that. So I just wanted to bring that to your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you, Heidi. You look like you might have had to have something to say. Daryl, did you want to finish us off?
Oh, no, I'm good. We've had good conversation on this. I'm very eager to see what comes out of it. And I hope it doesn't just become a survey like the 2030 plan, which became the 2040 plan.
Oh, yeah.
Which will eventually become the 2060 plan eventually.
We'll be dead by then.
But so I do think that the survey has momentum, it has discussion, and it has merit. And with those 3 things, I think the discussion piece, obviously you heard it here from selected advocates, but on the street, I'm sure you hear a little bit of a different story. and it varies from time to time and from the day of the week versus the time you're doing the survey. So, I mean, I just commend you for the work that you're doing, and let's continue to do more of it together.
And get the word out more.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daryl, and thank you very much, Ashley. I was happy to give this a little more time because it's quite interesting. I'm curious, just one last question for you. So is there like one or two things that stuck out to you or that you found the most interesting out of this survey?
Oh, it's that piece about errand trips. You know, like people continue to take transit to just get their life done. And that says a lot about why people are on transit, but also about the kind of transit system that we need. You know, errands are those little things it's a short trip and you just need to get to the grocery store and back, and it shouldn't take you an hour to do it. And it goes back to something someone said about a grid system, the hub and spoke, you know, like, we need like that same fast, frequent, all-day service that like Metro Transit is pushing for. Like that's what errand trips need. So I think that they're on the right track with that kind of planning. Yeah.
Actually, my family has used that, the bus to get to the school to get to the school to pick up my daughter if my daughter's sick and we don't have access to her vehicle. So, I mean, the bus goes right by her school. We usually know the bus schedule by heart. So we can we'll be there in 20 minutes. If we're not there in 20 minutes, it'll be 40 minutes, but we'll be there. They're like, oh, okay. So, I mean, we have used it in those regards too, so.
Again, thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks. This was
Ashley.
such a great group to present to. I really appreciate having all the extra time for the discussion.
Yeah,
That was nice.
and I think I speak for everybody. We look forward to a full data set too.
Yeah, we'll be back, hopefully with new and interesting results. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, Andy. Andy is up on our Metro Mobility update. It's been a few months, so it's nice to get an update on Metmo.
Yeah, and I will say, since I was gone, this is not, has in the woods kind of, or in the weeds, stat-driven as my typical presentation. It's a great overview that Christine put together, hence the PowerPoint. So less than stats, assuming that you already know and understand what Metro Mobility is in great detail. This is going to be sort of an overview of what we are and how we're doing and why that is, and some initiatives. So a little bit different. But that said, I should say, since I was supposed to be done more than 5 minutes ago, I don't want to, since I'm here every month, I don't want to bump something that is more time sensitive. So should I go?
We're good on time.
Okay.
Yeah, but thank you for the question.
All right, if we can move to the first informational slide, please. I guess I should point out for anyone who doesn't know, I'm Andy Streasick. I manage customer service for Metro Mobility. The first informational slide shows a map of the service area. Our main service area is broken into 3 zones. Roughly speaking, the west zone consists of the portion of Hennepin County that has Metro Mobility service, and the east zone consists of the portion of Ramsey County that has service, plus like Stillwater and some surrounding communities and down into Woodbury. And then the south zone has Bloomington and Richfield from Hennepin County, and then otherwise has the portion of Dakota County that has service, and into Cottage Grove and some surrounding communities. If you look at the contracts that are currently in place, we have our West Zone contract, which is in place until 2026, our East Zone contract, which is also in place till 2026, and our South Zone, which is in place until 2025. We also have an agency service, which serves all zones within the federally mandated footprint, and that is in place to run until 2023. For folks who may not be aware, agency service essentially is more of a school bus style run that is all standing order based, designed to bring people to either DTNHs or similar center-based opportunities, or in some cases do some midday trips, mostly vocational, in and out of those DTNH type of facilities as that transitions to more of a community employment model.
Andy, do you want a larger one?
That's okay, thanks. We also have our premium on-demand taxi service, which is in place until 2023 on the existing contract. And then I wanted to call out that the Metro Mobility Service Center, or MMSC, is up and running. We are open. All of our services are back up and running post-pandemic related closures. So we're doing in-person assessments. We do have some staff on during all of our normal business hours. Most of our staff is doing a hybrid teleworking on-site model. We do have some folks who are, or one person at least, who is working exclusively in office. We have a couple of changes at the staffing level. We have a new project administrator who is kind of the frontline staff person to oversee one of the contracts, who has just started. His name is Bill. And he just started while I was gone, so he is brand new. And then we also have an opening currently for one of my two ADA paratransit evaluators, who meets with folks to see whether or not they would be eligible for Metro Mobility. We are doing the first round of interviews for that later on this week. If we could go to the next slide, please. By the numbers, that shows 2021, roughly 83 million in operating expenditures, about 1.8 million in ridership, which is down from a little over 2.4 in 2019, which shows the impact on our ridership that the pandemic had. We have 64,500 certified riders, of whom about 17,500 are active, meaning, you know, have ridden in the last year, essentially. We're using 633 vehicles, serve 94 communities, and a big change that some of you might note, you know, our entire subsidy has hovered under $30 for as long as I've been with the council, and that's been a real point of pride, because the ADA paratransit subsidy average nationwide was always around $50. And you see the impact on the pandemic of our subsidy, which is now up to about $42.59 per trip. But I would suspect that nationwide there have been similar increases to what the subsidy is per trip. So I suspect we're still doing quite well compared to the federal average, and we would certainly expect that to fall again as things kind of continue to move towards a pre-pandemic level of service. Another thing that's interesting is our average trip length has risen significantly from around 11, you know, in years past, to about 13.9. So of the trips that are being taken, they're definitely trending longer. Next slide, please. This is just showing essentially ridership trending upwards as we kind of rebound from the maximum ridership depression that was caused earlier on in the pandemic. As was typical of ADA paratransit throughout the country, we initially fell by about 80% of our ridership, just plummeted. And then in keeping with the national trend, have sort of steadily gone back up. Essentially, the story here at a glance is that for most of this year, we've been at about 80% of normal ridership, as defined by pre-pandemic levels. Next slide, please. And this is just showing key performance indicators going back to 2019, pre-pandemic, looking at on-time performance, meaning did we arrive within the half an hour pickup window? On-time performance as it relates to appointment times or drop-off times. If someone says, I need to get there by 9 a.m. to get to work, did we get them there before 9:01? And did we get them there, less than an hour beforehand? And then onboard times, meaning per our formulas, did the Metro Mobility trip pretty much match in terms of onboard times what you would expect a fixed route trip to take using Metro Transit or a fixed route system in that community. The story here essentially is that you'll see on, pretty much across the board here compared to 2019, we are feeling the pinch of driver shortage in a really unprecedented way. Now, we kind of inadvertently might be guilty of crying some wolf here, not that we would have ever thought that. The bottom line is we're always short drivers. All Metro Mobility contractors perpetually hire drivers. When they're at their peak numbers, their proper numbers, they just keep hiring because they know that it's a tough job, there is significant attrition, and if they don't keep hiring, they're gonna regret it. So they always are short drivers. It is seldom that they are right at where they would like to be. But the reality is that this is really, really an unprecedented time. And I'll get to in a little bit here what we're doing to respond to that. But really, when you look at where we're at with regard to on-time performance compared to 2019, we're still doing pretty well by federal standards, but that black line that is shown is at 93%. The feds would like us to be at 90% for on-time performance, 95% at on-board time. We have an on-time performance expectation for both pickup and drop-off of 93% for our contracts. And you can see are well below that on appointment times. That's the most egregious one we're working on. But all of those are related to driver shortages. And I can tell you that based on steps we've taken, if we were looking at just the last couple of months, this would be a much more rosy picture. Thankfully, some of the steps we've taken are starting to pay off. So again, I'll get to that in a minute. Next slide, please. One of the things that we have unfortunately needed to do, sort of our least favorite tool to utilize, is we've needed to bring back some non-ADA denials, some denials of trips that are not federally mandated. And right now, in June, we were up at approximately 1,300 denials. That's one-way trip denials. We made it through March and April without really needing, without doing any. But what we found was, given the driver shortage reality, that March and April decision by the providers to do no denials was really leading to some suffering for federally mandated trips. So passengers who were taking federally mandated trips were experiencing worse level of service, and we really felt like this was one of the things we needed to remind them to utilize to try to address that. What I should clarify is that since these are all non-ADA trips, there's a few things that our contracted staff can do when they call people back to let them know a trip was denied that they can't do with a federally mandated Metro Mobility trip, chief amongst which is negotiate. So Wednesdays are our busiest day. If somebody tries to book a ride at peak time on Wednesday and it gets denied, we could call them back and have our contracted staff say, hey, you know what, I see you're going to Walgreens at 9 a.m. on Wednesday. I don't know if you work at Walgreens, if you're trying to do a shift, but it doesn't look like it because I see a 10 o'clock return trip. We can't do that 9 o'clock. But Mondays are much lower ridership for us than Wednesdays. If you can do Monday, we can do that trip. Or, 9 a.m., our morning peak is rough, but boy, if you could do this trip at 11 instead, then we can do that. So we have been encouraging our contractors to negotiate that way rather than just saying, sorry, we can't do this trip. For those of you that don't know, per federal rules, and we just apply those even to the non-federally mandated trip, if you can't do a go ride or can't do a return ride, then the other one-way trip also counts as a denial, called a denial due to a denial. In other words, it doesn't do any good to bring you someplace that we can't get you back, or it doesn't do any good for us to get you back from someplace that we couldn't bring you in the first place. Now, the one exception to the...
What if I only want a one-way, though?
Exact. Well, if you only want a one-way, then you'll only, book a one-way. But the other part that we have told our contractors is, while that will be the rule, if that's what the customer, needed, if they really needed both ways, give the customer the option. Maybe they can spring for a taxi one way, using premium on demand. Maybe they have other options. Maybe they have support in place that could give them a ride one way.
Or like in my case, I can often get one way in my ride, but I can't get the other way. So it just depends on my schedule, what I got going on. I do admit that if I'm looking for my return ride and I didn't take a initial ride there, I do admit that that's challenging sometimes with the drivers because they're confused because they're like, well, I don't show him anywhere on the system today, so are you sure he's gonna be here? And they're like, yeah, you have to wait for him, he'll be there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I am sorry, Daryl, members of the committee, I do normally like to keep these more conversational, but just since we're running so far behind, I think I will take further comments at the end, just to make sure we have as much time as we can to get through stuff. The other denial guidance we've given our contractors is really try not to nail the same person with denials over and over again. Spread out that pain as much as you can, given the reality that we do want you to deny as few trips as possible. So if somebody's taken, which we have in our system, 40, 50-mile trips, they're going to get denied more than a 3-mile trip is going to within the non-ADA service area. Because if we can deny that one trip, maybe that means we don't have to deny 6 other ones. So we are trying to do that, but we're also trying to temper that by saying, look, maybe a couple times a week, look for some other long trips that you can deny instead of just hammering this one over and over again. So that's kind of the guidance we've given around non-ADA denials. And again, for people who aren't familiar with Metro Mobility, we don't do any ADA denials. Trips within the federally mandated service area, we interpret that to mean, 0 equals 0 in terms of an appropriate number of denials within the federally mandated service area. If Metro Transit goes there, you've got a civil right to take Metro Mobility there. We don't deny any ADA trips. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. All right, so here again, we're talking about impact of workforce shortages. This is current vacancies. Essentially, we've got 11 vacancies at transit team altogether, combination of West, East, and agency contracts, and 33, West and agency, not East, and then First Transit East has 33 vacancies. Beyond what we would want to see as like the appropriate operator count. But again, that number at the end of needed operator is misleading because they would happily hire above that number. Really what you're talking about there is kind of a minimum. The compelling status, that first line, 21 versus 20, hiring dropped down 39% over our main contracts. And in addition to just hiring, in addition to just the number of employees, you got to remember that in some of our contracts, literally every driver got hit with COVID and was out for an extended period of time, either because of they themselves getting sick, or because someone close to them got sick, or of course they were exposed. These are people who are out in the community driving the bus all over the place. So overall, we ended up about 25% short of our available drivers, where we'd want to see who was available to work versus who we had to work or who we needed to work. The most effective tool for fixing that mess thankfully took place in February when the council graciously agreed to raise the rates for those contracts to go to an additional $3 an hour rate for all drivers, across the board. And it just had a tremendous impact. There are other things that our contractors had been doing, offering hiring bonuses, retention bonuses, those types of things, and those have been good too. But at the end of the day, how much you make per hour is the bottom line for most of us. So that tool, first of all, did all go to drivers and has made a tremendous difference since that got up and running and people have heard about it. Hiring and retention trends are absolutely improving, and contractors really, it has gone from a tone of, God, I don't know what we're gonna do, to, since that increase in wages, I think we're okay. We're climbing out of this, and we're absolutely going in the right direction. And I think I'm getting to a point where I'm okay with where we're going. I feel good about it. So that's been wonderful to hear from the people who are doing this day in and day out and have that expertise. Next slide, please. In terms of customer support and engagement, overall, when you look at it for all of 2021, our hold times were well within their goals and federal mandates. We had 96.8% of our calls answered within 3 minutes. That was partially bolstered because reservationist wages also were increased due to council subsidy. They went up by $1 at the basement and up from there. We are well aware that in 2022, one of our contractors had a hiccup where all of a sudden they just caught lightning in a bottle and perfect storm, a bunch of people quit, a bunch of people got sick, and their numbers plummeted for a period. That was exacerbated by the fact that they kept getting no-showed for job interviews, but they have now come out of that. Again, the additional $1 an hour, I think, really helped with that, and thankfully that is resolved with them. But we are aware that for a moment in time in 2022, things got pretty bleak for one of our contractors on the reservations times, but they have taken steps to address it. Hard copy newsletters went out in the fall and spring. The digital newsletters go out to anyone for whom we have an email address on file. That's up 52% since 2020. One of the reasons for that is we just started automatically, if you share your email address with us and indicate that you would prefer contact with email on your application, we are signing you up for the virtual newsletter. So that is helping get the word out. And then also notifying people of events like the community conversations, which we held virtually in October and in this last May. We will hopefully be at a time soon again here where it makes sense to do those in person. But we are doing those virtually to get customer feedback too. One of the things that we started during the height of the pandemic that we're likely to continue doing post-pandemic is virtual assessments, virtual eligibility assessments. Obviously, that doesn't fit for everybody. You know, if our paratransit evaluators who have occupational health backgrounds, you know, need to do a balance test with you that necessitates physical contact, you know, if they need to take you for a walk, if you've got a developmental disability that is such that they need to do a simulated bus trip with you to look at landmark recognition and memory recall skills, those aren't going to work. But on the side of some psychiatric disabilities, on the side of any physical disability that fluctuates a lot, where really what we're going to mostly be talking about is a conversation, we can do those virtually. So if we get applications that indicate a disability where it would be appropriate to offer a virtual assessment, we're doing that now, and are likely to continue doing that in the future. As you might expect, if you're familiar with the system and federal law, for folks who required an in-person assessment over the last couple of years, while we haven't been doing them, they've just had presumptive eligibility. So no one was denied access to the service for lack of an in-person assessment. If you need one and we aren't doing them, you just ride until we can do one. And like I said, we are back open and are back doing those. So we anticipate by the end of the year, everyone who has been granted presumptive eligibility will have been properly assessed. Next slide, please. The Premium On Demand, or taxi service, has been in place since 2004. Much like the rest of our ridership, it was heavily depressed by the pandemic. It's at about 50%, or was at about 50% in 2021 of ridership pre-COVID. Again, that's in place until 2023. We launched the iHail app with them that allows for mobile device or desktop computer-based booking of rides, and have recently migrated our reservationists out of the booking process for those trips, so that users of the Premium On Demand contract, whether they're calling to talk to a reservationist or using the app, will totally bypass the Metro Mobility system, which means good things for hold times for riders who are using the core Metro Mobility system. The service matches the Metro Mobility service area and Metro Mobility service hours. So if you can get a ride someplace by Metro Mobility, those are the times during which you can get a ride using the Premium On Demand cab service. There needs to be comparable accessible vehicle service. That is a federal law, and it's something that we have been pressing. Quite frankly, if you are ambulatory and use Premium On Demand service, you may see a decline in your service quality a little bit, because what we have told them is, look, we understand driver shortages, we get it, we understand that you might be struggling having drivers who can drive your accessible vehicle fleet in particular, but if you can't provide an accessible ride on the Metro Mobility contract, don't provide an ambulatory ride on the Metro Mobility contract. We're not saying that you have to come through the pandemic providing the ideal level of service. We're saying that under federal law, you need to provide the same level of service for folks who use mobility devices as somebody who's ambulatory would get. So that's our message to them. How that works on the cost side for customers who might not know about it, it's essentially a subsidized cab ride where the council will pay up to $15 of your cab ride. So you know, you call the cab company, you book the ride, the customer pays the first $5. Metro Mobility pays up to the next 15, and then you pay, the customer pays anything over that total metered fare, $20. We are very interested and will continue to pursue having an additional contractor, other than just the one, taxi services or Transportation Plus. We authorized a reward through Lyft in 2020. Unfortunately, the scope of work that they presented didn't end up matching what they were actually able to do. Lyft was not willing to put in the infrastructure necessary to match our service area and hours. So it likely would have been a pretty bare bones service, and rather than launching a confusing version of Premium on Demand that only worked at certain times, maybe certain days of the week, we scrapped that and are going back out here to look for other options. Next slide, please. Had some just technology improvements in the works here. Coming up in September, we will be upgrading to a newer version of Trapeze, which is sort of our main scheduling software. One of the cool things about that is that real-time traffic that I talked about a couple of meetings back. We'll follow that upgrade with a 50-bus pilot. That will also allow in August already of this year, pre that upgrade, our dispatchers will be able to do web-based vehicle monitoring for increased safety. You maybe have seen in the newspaper recently some Metro Mobility thefts of vehicles, and then this will really help dispatchers easily be able to see where all those vehicles are all at the same time to help with avoiding and mitigating the impact of theft. We have a service infractions model that is part of Trapeze that we're looking at maybe Q4 of this year that will help make things easier to monitor with regard to no-show activity or customer conduct activity, and then trying to make some updates to our customer complaint module or customer feedback module that can also be used for compliments that we expect to happen in July to September, kind of an ongoing thing that they're working on. Also, not directly Metro Mobility related, but including Metro Mobility, the entire council website is being considered for a redesign. I know you were all offered the opportunity to provide some feedback to an external contractor. They also talked to council staff, including myself, about some potential changes. And then one of the things that we're looking at least to evaluate the feasibility and interest in, is online application processing. Something we looked at pre-pandemic, and given the two-pronged nature of our application, where part of it applicants fill out themselves, part of it a medical professional fills out. Medical professionals at that time were not real interested in an online format and indicated they probably weren't likely to use it. But remember, that was pre-pandemic by quite a ways, and now most of those same providers have a whole different level of experience with regard to paperless forms and doing things in a remote fashion. So we just want to see what might be possible there as well. Next slide, please. This last thing, I know I talked about this at length at a previous presentation, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about service area changes again here, just because it's a huge change that we don't do that often. In February, we added expansions based on expansions to Metro Transit service. So those have been in now for several months, and those are indicated by some blue dots on the map that you see that should have alt text describing where they are in some detail. And then we have also sent out notification. Oh, what's that? Oh, I think I thought somebody said something.
Yeah, I heard it too.
Here, but maybe, no. Then there's also red areas showing that are indicating areas that will go from what is currently ADA service to non-ADA service. Again, I want to put it that way because it might be easy to in shorthand call those service area cuts, but I want to stress that our footprint of our service area is staying the same. It's just that those areas that are in red will go from being ADA federally mandated service to non-federally mandated service based on changes that were made to fixed route Metro Transit service. And again, I should stress, and I know you heard this when I presented on this topic in more detail, we did not take into account COVID era cuts to Metro Transit. We just feel like we're really hoping those are short-term in response to the pandemic. We're hoping Metro Transit's gonna bounce back with a robust system again as we come out of the pandemic. So we looked at cuts that were made in 2019 that we had not responded to yet when we were looking at the areas that we were turning from ADA to non-ADA. And we didn't send out the notifications for those pursuant to the 6-month notification that's required under federal law to probably take place at the end of November, that those changes would go into effect. All right, and last slide, I believe. I will take questions if the chair thinks it's appropriate. I did want to take the opportunity at this slide too to point out one more thing to Richard's question about fare simplification. On Metro Transit, if they should simplify the fare system on Metro Transit to go away from the peak, off-peak fare structure, that is absolutely something that Metro Mobility would follow suit on.
Thank you, Andy. This is David. Just 1 second, Sam. So we have about 11 minutes. I want to give folks the option to, if they want to, I will take a few questions, but I give folks the option, if they can take their question offline, please do. Otherwise, keep it kind of short. I'm going to ask one quick question about premium on demand. Is there the possibility to get stats in terms of like stand-ups or no-shows, anything like that for the taxi service, or that's just not possible at this time?
It's something we can get from them, but I have to deliver it with the caveat that, you know, I'm really confident in the stats on the Metro Mobility system that I get, because I can monitor where the bus is, I can look at how long it was there, I can make sure it was in the right spot. And really, with the cab rides, I'm just taking their word for it. Okay. So I can get you what they tell us, essentially, with regard to performance statistics.
And take that with a grain of salt. Thank you. Chris?
I just have a fiscal question, Andy. You know, since our fiscal year starts July 1st of 2021, and we've had this tremendous increase in energy costs, do we have a contingency? Because we have to go to June 30th of 2023 so that we don't run short of funds for fuel costs and have to cut back further rides.
Yeah, the structure of Metro Mobility, thankfully, is such that it has been and will continue to be somewhat protected from those kinds of wild fuel cost fluctuations. So we are somewhat insulated from that. It's obviously an impact, and it will impact future prognostication. But in the moment, we'll be okay with that.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, go ahead, and then Sam.
Just quick, I probably should take this offline, as David suggested, but I've had 2 calls, one in April and one this past Sunday, about denials. The person that called me Sunday stated that they were in a wheelchair and they were going to church, and they've been taken before to church and they were denied. And they had called in Saturday for the ride. So are the denials more frequent now, or you did touch on that topic, so?
Yeah, certainly, again, we went a couple of months earlier in the year without any and now we're up at about 1,300 of them a month. And again, that's one-way trips. We do absolutely empathize, and again, we try to spread that around. But absolutely, our number one priority from a federal law standpoint, and you know, from a council mission standpoint, frankly, we need to provide the civil right that is, if a person without a disability can take a public transit trip someplace, then somebody with a disability who can't take fixed route needs to take that public transit trip someplace. And then we, of course, want to provide more, you know, beyond where somebody without a disability would be able to get. We want to bring our entire community of folks with disabilities, you know, as far as we can, within our footprint. But the reality has been with the driver shortage, that the denials have gone up. We fully anticipate that from my perspective, one of the absolute best side effects of the increasing success with driver hiring and retention is that those denials are going to go back down.
Thank you. Sam, go ahead.
Yes. Okay. So here you go. So first of all, just a comment of real quick. I hear a lot of times from order takers that I shouldn't hear from that say, there's a lot of changes coming down. There's a lot of changes. And I wish that we would be told first instead of hearing it from an order taker. But one is a question that I don't know if it's true, so I want to clear it up. And the other is a comment or a question on the premiums. So one is that true that I understand that if you cancel less than an hour in advance, you know, it's a no-show. Now I'm getting told that if you cancel more than an hour in advance, it puts a mark on your record, which I think is not fair and inappropriate for many reasons, but I'll let you answer that in a minute. And the other one is in regards to the same days. I and other people have had a lot of problems with this, and I know you said this wasn't uncommon, but having drivers show up, also having drivers take the ride, but then it switches to another car, and then all of a sudden both rides go away. I had brought this up at the Metropolitan meeting and was hoping to get an understanding of what was going on, and was told that you were going to have a meeting with them, and we never heard about what happened at that meeting. And my last comment is, so if they're told that they have to do the same amount of rides of, wheelchair as opposed to non-wheelchair, does this mean that that's maybe why we're not getting some of the rides, is because they're not doing those rides so much? Just some thoughts. And the last one, I'm sorry, is that so if you're telling providers to try to not pick on the same person every time in the non-ADA, which is what I'm in, how are they keeping track of that they don't do that? I'll stop now. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. I think I can answer all of those pretty quickly. Specific to the cancel same days or cancels more than an hour in advance, those aren't counted against you. And as a general rule, I mean, I love our drivers and our reservationists so much. They do such wonderful work on so many different fronts. Do not expect to go to them for policy decisions, policy changes. Literally, probably 8 times out of 10, those are not accurate. A person is new, or a person has misinterpreted something, or maybe a person's boss at a contractor just flat told them the wrong thing. But no, you will hear something, or at least we will have attempted to communicate something before it comes from a reservationist, and there is no penalty for canceling a ride the same day more than an hour in advance. With regard to the overall cab ride performance, we have actually a number of ongoing meetings set up at this point with the cab provider, but the big one, I have been gone for 3 weeks. I think that's probably part of the reason that it hasn't happened yet. But they are aware of the performance concerns. With regard to the equal access requirement, that should happen at the point of booking. So What may happen more for you, Sam, is you call to get a ride and they'll say, I'm sorry, we just don't have anything available. Because they don't have any accessible vehicles available. And we're telling them, look, if you can't book an accessible ride, don't book any Metro Mobility rides. So yeah, that should happen at the point of booking. The issue around, once a ride is booked, it gets moved around or a driver takes it and then it gets moved to a different vehicle, is about the driver shortages that we've been, impacted by, also impacting them. But that said, we expect better from customer service and transparency than what you're describing. And I can absolutely come and talk to you here after these meetings have taken place, or while these meetings are taking place, since it's likely to be an ongoing process.
Andy, I'm sorry to interrupt. Is there any chance we can be a part of those meetings?
I don't know, frankly. I think at some point, that's certainly, I think having, the TAAC or the disability community as part of that, as part of some meetings with the taxi company, I think makes a lot of sense. Whether that is, some of this that we need is about some reporting access. I think we need to have some meetings that are in-house first, and then absolutely, I think that makes a lot of sense to bring you guys in. Last thing that I wanted to mention, you can easily see in Trapeze, our software, when someone has been denied a trip. The trip subtype is listed as a capacity denial. And as trips are denied, that is something that dispatchers are looking at as they make the decision of which trips they need to deny. Does this person have recent capacity denials or denial due to denials in their trip history?
Thank you, Andy. Thank you very much. That was informative. We have 2 minutes. I'm going to fly through the last few things on the agenda, and I still want to leave. Actually, let's go to public comment first, because that's something I want to get in before 2:30 rolls around. Is there any member of the public who wants to comment? Fantastic. How about member comment? Any member comment? Go ahead, Heidi.
I just recently found out when I went to the Gay Pride Festival, and I didn't know, because I thought you had to sign a piece of paper that says if you want to be left at, because I wanted to walk over to the Gay Pride Festival and be dropped off between the Sculpture Garden and Walker Art. And I thought you had to have someone walk you to the park, but there is this thing where they can, and we miscommunicated. You probably could hear me kind of like trying to understand what he wanted me on the phone. But you can get it where they can just drop you off, and then you're kind of on your own, because I've asked those questions before, and they said, no, because that's a dangerous road, and we can't, and I am capable of crossing certain roads by myself. So I didn't understand, because it's still a kind of dangerous road, sort of, going there. But I've had other places where they weren't open, or we got there too early, and I can go over there, and I still can cross the road. So how did that work when you can't and can and can't and can?
Chair, Heidi, members of the committee, I can answer that briefly if you'd like me to do so.
If you so desire, please.
For people who never want the driver to escort them through the first door of their location, we have an escort waiver, which will actually be a waiver of a Minnesota law that requires that our drivers do that. So if it's an all-the-time thing, passengers need to sign that and have it notarized. That's the paper you're talking about, Heidi. But we do outdoor drops, and obviously there is no door to walk through to meet that legal requirement. So
I learned that.
to do an outdoor drop, all a customer needs to do is request an outdoor drop at the time of the booking. If it's not requested at the time of the booking, the driver literally legally can't accommodate that. But if when you're booking the ride, you say, I want an outdoor drop, then that's fine. And that could be because you're going to a park that has no door, or that could be because you want to sit outside your house and smoke a cigarette before you go in. If you request an outdoor drop, then they can do that.
Okay, good, because I learned something new. Thank you. We all thought you had to sign a piece of paper.
Member comment, Chris?
David, just a quick thing, between you and Andy, can you send me a contact for the North Star? I have two disabled friends in Rogers who used to take it to the Twins games pre-COVID, and since COVID, the North Star's not running through the Twins, so if one of you could get me a contact, and I'll give them that information.
Thank you, Chris. Any other member comment? Gary?
Is there any way that you could maybe send out, do an email blast about how to make rides? Because the machine is, the message machine is saying that it's better to make your rides online rather than call in.
Okay.
Because it's either faster or something.
Yeah, I know they're trying to push people on
Because-
to online.
Because if we do that, how do we know that that it's going to be provided, or if that's going to
You're
be?
gonna get a confirmation message. Once you do that correctly and completely, you're gonna get an automatic message that's gonna be sent back to you, and you'll be able to see that in real time when that message was received and that they
By email?
that they approved your ride.
Thank you, Daryl.
Text, right? It's a text-based message.
No, for the online trip booking, you'll actually be able to see it right in the app. So you will request the ride and you will get the ride right away within the app. It's in there and you'll see it. There's a calendar that will show all your booked rides. If you use that app, you'll just see, yep, you've got this ride, it's done.
So where am I going? Am I going onto the MTC or METC?
You can get that information, just since we're short on time, we'll get that information to you, okay? Carrie?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Any other member comment?
I have one more.
Take it away.
Really quickly, when I first heard about what Carrie's talking about, the phone goes right to that, and it doesn't introduce himself saying it's Metro Mobility. It went through it, so I called a couple of times, not understanding. I did not misdial. It just says you can now you can book online, and I was like, what? I'm calling Metro Mobility. What am I doing? So can we start in the future when we do those kinds of things, and you want us to know about it? First, introduce yourself, and then go into your little speech.
Yeah, I think in the future, we can have the voice actor say first always, thank you for calling Metro Mobility.
Yes, thank you. That would be lovely. Thank you.
So anybody on the subcommittee reports that are just dying to give an update? No? Daryl?
The only
Fine.
update I want to give is the purple line. We're engaging folks in the community through the Community Business Advisory Committee, and we'll have our first meeting in the community virtually tomorrow. And then also on the gold line, I received, while I was out of town last month, I believe I received a recognition from Metro Transit and the gold line folks for my 3 years of commitment to BRT and so forth. So thank you for that.
Fantastic. And so the last agenda item, I'm going to go over real quickly, the TAAC 30th anniversary. We plan on having a work group meeting this month. I've already reached out to, I think, the 4 of you who showed interest earlier.
I'm coming.
Fantastic. Yes, I did email you, Heidi. You are on the list. I just want to put a call out for folks who want to join that. By all means, Chris. I will add you to the list. Thank you all very much. What are we at here? 36, 6 minutes over. Thank you for staying with me.
Move adjournment.
Adjourned.